Alrighty, good evening, good morning, hello, I'm Jonathan, Game Master Jay, and this is NycosRPG. I want to thank you for being here tonight. We've got a few subjects we want to talk about, and although I am set up with the possibility of continuing conversation far beyond the end of the time frame, I'm intending for this to be about 30 minutes worth of time that you'll be spending with us, unless, of course, you wish to carry on more conversation. Be glad to do so. We're going to talk a little bit about an expansion of the awareness of the Order of Veils. We're going to be looking at some new changes in the, some of the additional steps in the Launchpad system, and we're going to also talk about the 9 things you need to know. So let's get started, shall we? Well, as we've talked about the veils, tonight we're going to talk about what the purple veil represents. As you may recall, each of the colors of the spectrum are being used, as are black, white, and gray, to represent the various philosophies of humanity in the world of Nikos. And tonight is no different. We're going to be speaking of Purpuros. And Purpuros is the avatar of the purple veils, and they are dedicated to the concept of temporal divergence. As their order arose during the period of the temporal storms, the idea of expanding lifetimes and the number of possibilities that time itself and variabilities can represent, they endeavor to increase the possibilities and the varieties and the sheer number of beings that might exist in these parallel timelines. They study times and the signs and endeavor to take advantage of any time and all time that might be available. Purpurine activists are known to attempt to manipulate time through magic effects, and in doing so, they are not only attempting to expand the number of survivable timelines, but also to provide each one of them with a viability and a healthiness that will maintain them into the future. And they attempt to jumpstart these temporal storms and even rupture time with magical effects if they can. They're studious and stubborn, but their order is active in these areas that are most sensitive to temporal activities, such as dimensional rifts and the much maligned ziggurats of power across the planet. So they not only endeavor to find out where those are, but how they might be manipulated to cause additional temporal divergences. We're going to switch gears a bit, and we're going to talk today about creative styles. And in particular, we're going to talk about the variety of means by which the stories can be told from a game master standpoint. And there are as many, I suppose, of these as there are storytellers, and so the ones I'm listing are only those ones of which I am particularly familiar. The first one, of course, is the nuts and bolts, and this is the game master who understands the mechanics of the game, understands the dynamics of how distance and ranging and such matter to the characters in the game, and therefore plays by just simply giving the description in squares, in number of hexes, taking into account move rates, etc. And these nuts and bolts of processes are perfectly aligned if the players themselves are also pursuing this level of direct connection. But in many cases, the players may be looking for a more homogeneous role play, or perhaps a more dynamic, cinematic style of play, and therefore these hard and fast and brutal numbers don't always fit to everyone. In another case, the storyteller loves to tell it from the standpoint of snapshots. He's got mental pictures in his head of the locales and locations and positions of the group as they move through the story, and so he will insert narrative descriptions that kind of feel like a physical description of the scene from a photographic instantaneous standpoint, and don't really take into account the variabilities and the fluctuations of the story, because he simply has got the mental pictures in his head, and therefore he wants to convey that. A third is perhaps the most popular storytelling methodology, and that's to tell the tales of the games in terms of the travelogue, where you are, where you've come from, where you're going, how long it took, what kinds of activities are you doing in the meantime, what kind of descriptions can be made about the locations that the players engage with, and the like. These travelogue styles are actually quite good for most conditions, although they tend to become stilted when the players are forced into the actual mechanics of a game and therefore have to start to determine these localized ranges that are not in the travelogue description. Another means of narrative storytelling is to utilize a book, chapter, verse structure, and this generally comes from people who are utilizing narrative sources, whether it be a module or a story campaign or even just a novel they've read. By using a book, chapter, verse methodology, what they're doing in essence is they are describing exactly as the person who wrote the material is doing. This means perhaps reading entire sections from the source, perhaps paraphrasing, or maybe just simply becoming so familiar that you're actually able to tell the story without the actual markers of book, chapter, verse. But in any case, these forms of narrative that are book, chapter, verse tend to not be as flexible as others, and sometimes are forced for the storyteller to actually retrace his steps in the story to define the escapes and such from the locale. One of the more recent types of game masters that I've perceived are those that believe in run-on sentences. They start to describe, and then they describe some more, and then they see a player response and describe some more. And this run-on sentence structure doesn't give really room for the players to interact with the story other than to perhaps toss in a die roll or whatever. But this run-on sentence structure is depriving the players of agency and depriving the storyteller of seeing the interaction between the players and his game world. And this leads, I think, inexorably to the next style of storytelling, and that's the minimalist, who literally gives the physical parameters of where the players are and then lets the players divine the rest of it, where they go to, what they do, how they stand, what they're seeing, and such like. And these minimalist storytellers basically become paper judges. They're only there to adjudicate the rule system and the play authorization within the game. The one that perhaps most people associate myself with is the idea of the seat of the pants narrative storyteller. And this is, he's describing a location. He's got an idea of what he wants to do as the players interact and they change things. Perhaps he moves on the fly and adjusts or adapts where the story is going so that he keeps the adventure in front of the players. There are benefits to the seat of the pants in that it tends to be exciting and whatever, but it's important to also have some frame of reference that allows the players to know where the boundaries are and what they are actually coming into contact with and how it's going to be perceived of their actions. When you run seat of the pants, you have to really make sure that you're also holding to something that's defining so that the players feel their agency and also feel the ramifications of perhaps poor choices. Another really popular way of describing the narrative is what I call chewing the scenery, and that is the game master has a mental picture of what he wants for the theme. He fills in the description and the size and the dimensions and the width, and by making it all chunky and filled in, it makes it difficult for the players to navigate within that space. And this chewing the scenery mechanism is in some ways helpful because it definitely blocks out what possibly could be the bad guys' approach angles, but it also deprives the players of a open field to work with. The next are those are the highest of fantasies, and this literally is somebody who changes the description moment by moment as the story progresses, not necessarily as it suits the players, but as he sees it. And so some people refer to these campaigns as fever dreams. Sometimes they refer to it as ultra high fantasy, but the idea is that the will of the players is defining the world, not just the will of the game master. And so therefore this highest of fantasy level roleplay tends to be grandiose and basically is an uncontrolled environment that the players simply enjoy their own independent storytelling within the grander story of the game master. A counter to that are those game masters who are unbendable, unbreakable rules in their descriptions. So when they say a building is so high, then you simply have to come over the harsh numbers of how to overcome them in order to move past them. And these sorts of hard defined adventures tend to leave the players frustrated and sometimes even wishing to abandon the story because it doesn't seem that they can have any agency in the world because they can't destroy the monsters or even affect any real damage to them. The penultimate one here is the heavy dose of hand wavium. It's a term my players came up with, and the idea is that as the game master starts to describe something, perhaps the role players and the rule players of the game start to debate and cause challenges within the scope of the adventure. Well, the game master can simply wave his hand over the situation and say, well, this is the way it's going to be, and that it's my way or the highway kind of thinking is a very heavy dose of hand wavium. Yes, it did get fixed and we did move on, but it may cause burdens against the players in the long term because they don't necessarily accommodate that kind of a strategy. And then finally, it may be the best, it may be the worst, but the idea of a player feedback loop. In other words, you start to tell a story in a desert and the players really dig it, and so they want to stay in the desert setting even as they've reached the point where they should leave the story. A game master who uses a player feedback loop will find ways to make sure that the players get their maximum benefit from the environment that they want to be in. And this feedback loop does lead to a less coherent and yet more enjoyable games environment. So it's a push me, pull you, but that's fundamentally the latest of the narrative styles I want to cover. My voice is going, so we have to get through these pretty quickly. The last thing I want to talk about are the 9 things that you need to know. Now, these are statements to you as players and as game masters, but in particular today I'm going to talk about the players because what every game group needs is its players. If you had a group and they didn't have any players in it, pretty soon there is no game. So just realize that if you are with a group and you're playing along, they would love to have you continue because it makes a difference. Now, this does require for the game master to realize that the play of a group is to play together, and so to focus on the collaboration and the connection between the players rather than the competition between them. I have seen games groups that fall apart simply because the game master pits 2 players against each other in some form of friendly, or was released initially, friendly competition, but by the 3rd or 4th session they're at each other's throats. In any games group, of course, communication is fundamental, and if you can't get your game master to listen to what you have to say, you're going to have issues. And so realize as a storyteller, you need to be able to embrace everyone else, and if you are a player, figure out ways to cross bridges rather than create problems. When you are in a role-play game situation, and the game master has provided a shared reality scene where the player's input is important and the players' interaction with each other are driving the story, they become more real when they are shared. So to make the games work more effectively, do what you can to help share the narrative reality, the description of what is going on, so that all of the players feel the connection between them, and the outcomes become therefore related to what the players have put into the story. The reality is that what you bring to the table matters, no matter what that is, even if it seems to be perhaps competition, perhaps mental challenges. Playing a game is a condition that allows each other to share and get to know each other. And while it's good to be a listener, it's great to listen to the actions of others, even better is your contribution. So even if you are normally a sideline sitter, consider putting your opinion into the engagement, because it tends to make the entire the gameplay environment closer, smoother, and more effective. Now, I will have to say that the only bad question is one that's not asked. So if you're in a scene and you're ever confused, pipe up, ask the storyteller, what did that mean? What's going on? Where am I? And all of these kinds of questions, although they might seem to be slowing down the action, they actually are putting the action on higher burner level, because everyone knows that you're following the story as well, and that adds to the experience. Now just realize also that just going along is certainly an option. If you want to sit on the sidelines, that's a possibility. But just realize that your considered concepts definitely will trump going along with anything all the time, even if you disagree with the majority of players. By being able to state your opinion and share it with others, you're going to make for a better game experience. After all, no matter what you think about it, it's true that the bad rolls and broken plans are what make the role-play games. If everything went exactly according to the plans and every situation was faced with equal aplomb, pretty soon people wouldn't be playing it again, because it's in those moments of indecision and bad planning that the games actually develop into enjoyable and fun experiences. Now, before we close, I do want to remind you that there is a role-play revolution underway. You can find out more at NycosRPG.com. For world lore information, it's NycosRPG.info. And for more information on how you can become a part of the community, patreon.com/NycosRPG. Now, final part I want to talk about here is to talk a bit about the concept of the transition protocols. As you can see, we're nearing the end of the list of components of the Launchpad. But in this case, the transition protocols is really the period of time where you make the move to action. This is where intention meets reality. It's one thing to say, I am going to do X, but it's completely other to actually step to the plate and say, I'm going to do X, and here I am doing it. Now, sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes you run into challenges. If you haven't noticed, I shaved my head, and I'm going to stay with a bald for a while just to see what it's like. And this intention, this idea of the transformation protocols, includes something radical that is reversible, but nonetheless does really reinforce the idea of change. So when you do a transition protocol, such as I've launched by the shaving of my head and building the Launchpad out this way, you are going to be reforming the patterns that you've had in your life. Simply looking in a mirror when you've got no hair, when you had hair yesterday, is definitely an eye-opening situation, and it helps to reform your patterns, because you simply can't do it the same way you did it yesterday, because now the world is a different place. Now, the fascinating part is that it takes some time to accept the new normal. And I know those of us that were involved in all of the enjoyment and thrill of the COVID days knows that the phrase new normal has kind of a negative connotation. But the reality here is that every day you have a new life, and every day creates a new part of the normal, and you can adjust your direction and sense of who you are moment by moment. And then as you do so, you can make lasting decisions. So perhaps shaving my head will be the way I live out the rest of my days. Perhaps not. I'm a bit of a yellow veil as well as an orange veil, so I don't imagine I'll keep it forever. But nonetheless, it's kind of interesting and fascinating to experience, and it definitely has helped me to change things. Now, it's important to know that when you do these things, you're not going to want to look back. It's not like I'm going to go, gosh, if I stop tomorrow, it'll take me 2 weeks to grow my hair back, and then everything will go back to normal at that point. That's not the point of it all. The point of it all is that we are now making a change across the board on a lot of different spectra. For example, I will be going out into the community this next week and having some interactions with people face to face that I haven't had in a while, because I need to re-engage. And although I've been a writer and kind of pigeonholed myself, I'm going to be attempting to expand my reach by getting into the presence of other people. And so when you make a transition protocol, when you make the decision to act, make it a decision that is going to be such that you will not want to look back. Because once you've made the change, looking back is only detrimental to you, because you'll remember how comfortable it was, and that comfort is itself a dangerous place to be. You need to be able to see the significance in the changes that you've made so that your particular advancements are maintained. Now, this means you'll be making new traditions and establishing new patterns, and that's okay. You just have to realize that in doing so, these are partially the measure of your success, because if you find yourself looking over your shoulder, then what you're doing is you're basically doubting your own actions. And by making this one that can be changed, let's say, heaven forbid, I decide I need to grow my hair back, I can do it in a few weeks. If I had some place I had to be where I had to have a head of hair for some whatever reason, I can do it. But the point is that I've chosen this path. This marks that path so that I am aware that I'm now on a different path, and these new traditions are a way for me to measure my success going forward. Now, obviously, there are going to be times when you're going to want to backslide. There's going to be times when you're going to say, well, this is too hard and too daunting. By making a change that's radical enough, even if I gave myself 1 or 2 days of indecision and ambiguity, nonetheless, I've now made a drastic enough change that it will take me a while to fall back completely. And therefore, I'm allowing for some backslide by recognizing that the change is longer term than the backslides would be. Because I have to remember, just as you do, that every day is a new day. Every opportunity we have is a new opportunity. And the reality is that our solution to all of our challenges is in the now. It's in the present. We can't wait for some other day for things to get better. As I quoted Nightbird the other day, we do not have to wait for everything to be perfect to choose to be happy. We can simply make that decision and then live accordingly. And that decision to be happy means that we're setting our other path, we're allowing for backslides, we're doing what we need to do, we're making lasting decisions, and we are working to reform our patterns so that our intention meets reality in the way we intend. So I have now officially formally finished the information that I wanted to carry forth. So if you have not had the opportunity yet, make sure you check out our information at NycosRPG.com. The lore for the game world is at NycosRPG.info. And join our revolution by clicking the Discord link below and hopping on and joining us in this endeavor to change the way roleplay is done. And to follow more stories, of course, follow us here on Twitch. And if you haven't yet, check out our YouTube channel at NycosRPG and watch our videos there. And if you like what you see, make sure you subscribe so that you get updated every time there's new videos that go live. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been NycosRPG.